Greetings, fellow ALARP 1 students. According to the FBI LEOKA program, 23% more law enforcement officers have been killed in the same time period of 2020 as 2019. Officer Joseph Mensa of the Wautusa, Wisconsin Police Department was physically assaulted and his home was vandalized by anti-law enforcement rioters. The rioters also fired a shotgun round into his home, all the while chanting Black Lives Matter. Evidently, the lives of Officer Mensa and others in his home did not matter because they were either a police officer or associated with a police officer. Captain David Dorn was murdered in St. Louis, Missouri on June 2nd, 2020 by a looter over a television outside his friend's pawn shop. Captain David Dorn was a 77-year-old husband, father, and grandfather who had given over 38 years of his life to community service to help better his community. Captain David Dorn was widely respected by both members of law enforcement and the community. Former St. Louis County Police Chief Tom Fitch said that Captain David Dorn was, quote, bigger than life. Captain Dorn will be forever missed both by family members, members of the community, and law enforcement professionals. The thesis for my presentation will be that anti-law enforcement rhetoric is hurting not only law enforcement, but the community at large. My presentation will cover 3 subtopics, the first of which being anti-law enforcement rhetoric. The second will be the effects of anti-law enforcement rhetoric on law enforcement, and the third and final subtopic will be the effects of anti-law enforcement rhetoric on the community. Law enforcement is the act of enforcing the law, usually done by someone who wears a badge and carries a firearm. The majority of law enforcement are some of the greatest people in our nation, who every day strap on their duty belts and put on their uniforms to protect law-abiding citizens like you and I. Law enforcement does much more than enforce the law. They purchase food for needy people, help in disaster situations, and run into collapsing towers such as 9/11. Sergeant John McLaughlin is an example of one of the bravest members of law enforcement. Sergeant McLaughlin was with the Port Authority Police Department on September 11, 2001. Sergeant McLaughlin ran into the towers, knowing that they were collapsing, to help others escape the towers. The towers collapsed on Sergeant McLaughlin and he was trapped for 21 hours. Sergeant McLaughlin was then in a medically induced coma for 6 weeks. He then had many long years of recovery afterwards. Many of you may be asking, why does this matter? This matters because all life has an intrinsic God-given value. It matters because police protect some of the most vulnerable among us. The most vulnerable among us include abused children, domestic violence victims, and elderly scam victims, who without the protection of police and law enforcement would be in cycles of continual abuse, continual poverty, and in some cases, even deceased. It matters because anti-law enforcement rhetoric makes communities less safe. A prime example of this is New York City. New York City, since defunding their police department, has seen, in September 2020 alone, a 56% increase in shootings, a 44% increase in murders, and a 28% increase in burglaries, according to Fox News. I would like you to take a moment to pause the video and write down a response to the following question. What does law enforcement mean to you? According to Spectrum News, NYPD retirements are up 25% over the previous year, in large part due to anti-law enforcement rhetoric and anti-law enforcement actions resulting from said rhetoric.